The resource person for the next session is Dr. Darshna Samaravera. Dr. Darshna is currently Deputy Director of the Faculty of Languages, Humanities and Social Sciences at the National Institute of Education, Sri Lanka. He is a teacher and a researcher for the past 29 years. As a curriculum developer, he has involved in developing the English language curriculum for the general education system in Sri Lanka since 2004. Right now, Dr. Darshna is a key member of the education reform movement taking part in the country. Dr. Samravara's presentation will be on awareness on research ethics starts at the inception of your education, not when you start your PhD. So we are looking forward for your presentation, and I'm sure that it's going to be quite engaging. Thank you so much, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And must thank the organizers, particularly my friend, Dr. Anita Sharma. And I'm extremely sorry, I ran into a technical error. So now I'm ready to present myself. Actually, the theme of the hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir. You're audible, sir.
All right. So, right, the research title, the title I have selected is research ethics. Sorry, I'm trying to. Okay, awareness on research ethics start at the inception of your education, not with the start of your PhD. This is what I am going to talk. And before that, I'm trying to bring a few things to you. That is about research ethics. I have selected 5 principles of research ethics published by the APA, American Psychological Association, which most of the researchers in our area they use as their guide. The 5 research principles, I will deal with the 5 research principles, and I will explain how we should, as teachers, continue to inculcate the idea of research ethics in our students. The research, the 5 principles given by the APA, they are as discuss intellectual property frankly, that is the first one. Discuss intellectual property frankly. Be conscious of multiple roles. Follow informed consent rules. Respect confidentiality and privacy. And tap into ethics resources. These are the 5 principles. Let me take them one by one and explain them and discuss how we should create this awareness at the beginning of their education. Maybe perhaps their school education, towards the end of their school education, maybe when they are at the college, maybe when they start their university education. So the first one is discuss intellectual property frankly. Now this is one of the very important issues when it comes to research ethics, intellectual property. And the APA says faculty advisors discuss publication credit with students as early as feasible. and throughout the research and publication process as appropriate. Now, this is not something that should come all of a sudden to a researcher, a research student. We, the advisors, should discuss the publication credit, the issue of publication credit with their students as early as feasible. Then only this becomes, we actually internalize this concept of publication credit. Otherwise, what happens is we understand that at the beginning of their academic career, maybe at the college, maybe at the end of the school education, when they are doing their research, their simple projects, many students, many of the students in this region, what they do is they simply try to do a cut and paste job without knowing that they are violating the intellectual property rights of others. So at a very early stage, I believe that we have to discuss this, and we have to give our students a proper understanding of how to give credit, the due credit to the researchers who have done a lot of work and who have toiled a lot in in their areas of research. And apart from this, we have another very important issue. That is, researchers need to meet their ethical obligations not only during the research, not only during the period they are engaged in the research, and not only in the stage, within the stage they write their research report. It's only after the research is published. Even after the research is published, researchers are obliged to stick to the intellectual property rights. Now, for example, according to the APA, it says if authors learn of errors that change the interpretation of research findings, they are ethically obliged to promptly correct the errors in a correction, retraction, erratum, or by other means. Now, this is something that we forget. Right? As researchers, our obligation, we are obliged to we are obliged by the research ethics, and it's our sole responsibility to be responsible for what we write, to be responsible for what we publish. And if there is any error that affect the interpretation of research findings, and if that is pointed out, we as researchers, we are obliged to correct them by any means. So this is something all research students, right, at the very beginning of their research career, they have to understand. But once we publish, if we think our job is done and there is no obligation from our part, then there will be problems, because research, what we publish, will be discussed and will be read, will be cited over and over again. So on such occasions, if we have provided wrong interpretations, we have to be very careful. This is the second point, and I want to discuss under intellectual property. And the next one is, this is also very, very important. Store all your data. Don't destroy it. Because if someone charges that you did something wrong, you should be able to go back to your data set. And don't destroy it. Keep your data set with you until you are sure that there is no charges there is no challenge against your research. If you destroy and if you cannot retrieve your data set, then you'll be in trouble. Because as a researcher, now this is what uh, Matthew McHugh says, store all your data, don't destroy. Because if someone charges that you did something wrong, you can go back. But this is not what I am telling, is what Matthew McHugh says to APA. Right? That is again research ethics. I have to give credit to the person who has mentioned this, the researcher. Right? And now it's time for us to think whether we do this, whether we store our data and the data set and whether we keep it safe, right, until we are sure that there is no charges against what we have done. So that is about intellectual property, discussing intellectual property, frankly. Right, and then let me come to right now again. What I want to suggest to the learned crowd listening to me is that if you are a teacher, if you teach research methodology, or if you guide your research scholars, please try to make these things a habit, a lifestyle of the researcher, and they are going to develop into researchers, independent researchers, and they will be guiding researchers, right, on such occasions. This has to be a lifestyle, respect to intellectual property, and we have to have different activities. We should give them different activities apart from the proper research training, right? We have to give them different activities that gives an orientation to our students regarding intellectual property. So the second one is be conscious of multiple roles. And with this, what APA's ethics code says is that researchers or psychologists should avoid relationships that could reasonably impair their professional performance or could exploit or harm others. Now, we as teachers, we know in our relationships, most of the time, there is this concept of power relations come, right? They come into forefront. And as teachers, as professors, as guides, as advisors, what we do is we get our students to engage in research activities. And especially when professors select their students as subjects of research. If power relations operate in a negative way, what will happen is that will harm or impair the relationship, and that will affect the research ethics. Particularly, we have to make the students, because now there are two relationships. If a professor selects his or her own students as subjects of the research, now there are two in the conflict. There is a conflict of interests. A, as the teacher with some kind of power. B, the student coming as a subject of the research within the sample. On such occasions, as researchers, because the professor also has two roles. One is the professor's or the teacher's role, and then the researcher's role, right? And we have to make the students, right, or the sample, regardless of their position, we have to make them convinced that their participation is voluntary. In any research activity, one of the main ethical considerations is that the participation of a of an individual is voluntary. If the individual is not willing to participate in the research study, he or she has the right to get out of it, to say no to it. But when there is this relationship, with these power relations happen within that context, of course, there'll be some kind of harm to that relationship. And this unnecessary use of power should not happen within a research. And this is what we understand as the being conscious of multiple roles. My role as a teacher should not make it, or should not affect my role as a researcher if I use my students as samples. So this is something very, very important, and this is something we should inculcate in our research scholars, because in the Asian context, teacher-student relationship is always, whatever said and done, based on power relations. So the third one is follow informed consent rules. And we all know, as researchers and research scholars, right, informed consent is very, very important. What do we mean by informed consent? When we engage in a research, right, all our subjects, all the participants in the research should have the right to be informed of the research study. Be informed of the research study they are going to be in as subjects, right? The consent process ensures that individuals are voluntarily participating in the research with full knowledge of relevant risks and benefits. Particularly, why? Because in social sciences and humanities, of course, the risks could be very, very less. But when it comes to natural science and research, and when it comes to research in the field of medical science, of course, there could be a risk associated with those research studies. And even in the case of humanities and social sciences, that there could be some kind of risk associated with. So the participants have the right to know the purpose of the research study. Without making them aware of the purpose of the research study, we should not start collecting data. Each and every participant should be well aware of the purpose of the research study. And then the duration of the research. Because if it is a longitudinal research, the participants will be involved in the process for a longer time. If it is a cross-sectional research, maybe it's once. You collect data once. But if it is a longer duration, the participants should know that they have to be in this process for this particular period of time. And when they are engaged in this particular period of time, right, maybe they cannot spare such a long time to be a part of a research study. So on such occasions, they can opt out, right? And that is what is called their right to withdraw at any point. Researcher finds it difficult if a subject withdraws, but this is what is called informed consent, and we should let them know at any point of the research they can withdraw. And the next is where the information will be published. What we are going to do with the information. We collect information regarding them. and maybe their personal information and their personal opinions, what they think of certain things and how they behave, right? And all these will be what we as researchers, what we are going to do with this information, right? If we are going to publish, where we are going to publish, right? Whether we are going to publish this information in a book, whether we are going to publish this information in an academic journal, right? Whether we are going to disseminate this information in a symposium, right? They should know very well where this information is going to be published. And then the benefits or threats involved, right? If there are benefits to the participants, we have to tell them very clearly, right? Oh, not only for the participants, if the information they provide benefits the country, benefits the world, benefits the a particular area of study, right? Benefits a particular discipline, then we have to tell them, look, the information you are providing us, right? We are going to use them, we are going to publish them, and this will be the benefit. And if there is a potential risk or a threat involved, we should very frankly inform of the risks or threats also. Why? Because then they can decide whether to continue as a subject of that particular research study or not. Right? So this is a very, very important thing. And the researchers at the very beginning of their research career, if they are informed and if they are well aware of these factors, particularly this informed consent rules, and how you write to your, or how you explain these things to your participants, your subjects, that will avoid a lot of, because at the end of the day, researchers might find it frustrating, because if when the participants withdraw, right, it's really frustrating. So better to, we as teachers, what we should do is, we better make them ready to face this as a reality, because informed consent, this is this is of course a very democratic process. We have to make them understand, make our research scholars, young research scholars understand that research is a very democratic process, and it is not a process that enforces or that forces people to get into the research process. So informed consent rule is very, very important. And if we as teachers can think of different activities to make them, to give our research scholars, young research scholars, an orientation to these at the very beginning, not when they start their PhD. Because we know it's very tough job. PhD for 3 years, for 4 years, maybe you suffer a lot. And on top of your sufferings, if this kind of disheartening situations happen, then we can understand the situation or the status of such a scholar. So better to give them an orientation to these kind of things at the very beginning of their career, research career, to avoid frustration. Then the next is respect confidentiality and privacy. In research, this is one of the very important things. Respecting confidentiality and privacy, particularly participants' rights to avoid answering sensitive questions. It's their sole right to avoid and saying, no, I can't answer that question if that is a very sensitive question. And in the Western world, of course, because this is a very crucial issue. And they know when to say no to sensitive questions. And but in this part of the world, sometimes we might go beyond the limits. So as researchers, one thing we should know is when to ask a question and when not to ask a question. Particularly, the APA says when it comes to the children, children have the right not to answer certain questions, not to disclose certain things. For example, family, information regarding family. That's a very sensitive issue. And information regarding gender, that's a very sensitive issue. And information regarding the sexual orientation, right? Those things are very sensitive, and we as researchers should know that our participants, they have a right to avoid answering certain sensitive questions, right? And the next is research participants have the freedom to choose how much information about themselves they will reveal and under what circumstances. This is what APA says in the ethics guideline. Research participants have the freedom to choose how much information about themselves they will reveal and under what circumstances. And again, this is linked to the informed consent rule, because we should let them know, right? You have the freedom to choose how much information about yourself you're going to reveal and under what circumstances. And then discuss the limits of confidentiality. As teachers, this is our responsibility to discuss the limits of confidentiality. And we have to give participants information about how their data will be used, because that comes under the limits of confidentiality, and how their data will be used and what will be done with case materials. If it is a case study, right, what will be done with case materials, photos, and audios and video recordings. Right, in audio and video recordings, if you use them in your research, right, especially the audio and video recordings, they are very sensitive. Photos are very sensitive things, because they reveal the individuality of people, and that's going to be some kind of, it might harm and it might impair certain relationships. And on such occasions, we have to be very clearly understand how we are going to use these materials. These materials, photos and audio and video recordings, right? And how we secure their consent. For example, in the United States, taking a photograph of a child, it's a very serious issue. If you go to a school, the first thing you hear is, don't take photographs of students without the permission of their parents. But in this part of the world, we know, right, because of it's very different. We think, okay, we can take photographs, we can video record things, we can audio record things, right, without any barrier. And especially in the subcontinent, right, this has become the normalcy, right? It's the norm, but we have to be very careful, and we have to give orientation to the prospective research scholars at the very beginning regarding these things. Otherwise, because most of these things are associated with our life as norms, we might forget this issue of confidentiality and privacy. On top of that, APA says, right, we have to be aware of the law, particularly APA says the federal law, but the federal law says about confidentiality and privacy. And if your organization, if your university has a set of rules regarding uh, confidentiality and privacy, certain international organizations like when we work with the British Council, the American Center, right? When they collect information, right, there is this particular section where we have to give our agreement to use our data, right, for certain purposes, right, and that is governed by confidentiality and privacy is governed by the rules or the law of the country. And the first thing we have to understand, when we have to know as researchers, right, and as teachers, we have to give this awareness to our students at the very beginning. And what is the law of my country regarding confidentiality and privacy? And what is the rule, or what are the rules of our organization, our university, regarding confidentiality and privacy? And the other thing is, if we don't have any for our organization or for our university, better to have a set of rules and regulations regarding confidentiality and privacy. That's very important. And then we have to be mindful of the way we store sensitive data, because we have to be aware of the limits of the internet when exchanging confidential information and when storing our data, sensitive data. And now we know there are certain cases and against these social media companies, social media giants, right? They have used our data in unethical ways, right? Because we provide our data to a third party, and if they provide our data to a third party without our consent, and if a third party has access to the place we have stored sensitive data, that is going to be a problem, right? And especially because of this, because of the developments happening in the area of artificial intelligence, the UNESCO is working on a special project these days to save children from the artificial intelligence, the adverse effects of artificial intelligence, because we don't know how our data will be collected. And I have a very interesting experience. Very recently, I traveled to a certain place, to the Parliament of Sri Lanka, with one of my friends, and he gave me a lift, and there was this dash cam, the camera on his windscreen, and I pointed to that and asked a few questions about his dash cam, and I asked whether he could operate it with his mobile phone and all that. And we parked the vehicle, and we were at the entrance of the parliament, and then suddenly he told me, look, I've got this advertisement on my screen. He has got it to his mobile, to his Facebook, right? That's an advertisement about a dash cam, of a dash cam with the features I was inquiring, and it had given the advertisement says where you can buy it. That means somebody has collected our information. So we have to be mindful of the way we store sensitive information, sensitive data. And the other thing is, when we exchange confidential information using internet, we have to be very much aware of the limits. limits of the internet when exchanging confidential information, and it is high time we discuss these things with the prospective research scholars as teachers. And then tap into ethics resources. What are the resources? Be aware of the various sources that could guide you through research ethics. Now, one thing I did was I used the APA's ethics guidelines to share certain information with our colleagues who join us today. Right? Like that, there are many resources you can find on research ethics. Right? And then when we find such research guides, such resources, that will be a fine guideline to prospective research scholars. So training the prospective research scholars should start at the very beginning. And it's not that we should start, it's not that we start it all of a sudden when they start their PhD project. And the other is find your institution's ethical clearance process. And most of the universities have ethical clearance. They have a kind of an ethical clearance process, an ethics review committee. And they should be able to find the process of ethical clearance of the institution, because at the end of the day, when it comes to a publication, ethical clearance is very important. And maybe in humanities and social sciences we don't pay much attention, but taking ethical clearance.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, will you please wind up because we have
Sure.
many questions also in the chat box.
This is the last
Okay, sir.
point, right?
Thank
And
you, sir.
yes, the last point is guide your students, find resources from the very beginning of their academic life. So this is what I wanted to suggest to the learned community listening to me. Beginning of research ethics should happen at the very beginning of your research career, not when you start the PhD process. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Shivani, are you
Thank
there?
you so much. Thank you so much, sir, for such an invigorating presentation on research ethics, sir. We would be looking forward for some more sessions coming from your side, sir.